Welcome, we're back in AP English, and we are now ready to make our final observations about Plato's Republic. I'll begin in Book 9. I'll make some final observations about Book 8, and maybe try and bring some summation as well to our entire study of Republic. I want to address this question that sometimes is a fairly self-evident question regarding the issue of the real versus the unreal in regards to Republic 7-8. This will actually set us up for our conversation of 9. Mr. McGee, why should I take an exam over Republic if none of it is real? This is a wonderful question. I feel that one or two of us maybe thought this question, but out of, I don't know, respect or something, decided to not say it aloud. So let me say it aloud for you. First of all, let's point out, when Plato plays the theory of the forms game, that is to say that two-box theory, where in the first box we have the beautiful body, think Brad Pitt or any other number of beautiful people, and in the second box we then have the concept of beauty. Plato is not, underline the word, Plato is not saying that that which is in the first box is not real. That's not what he's saying. But maybe the way I've said it in the past is this. He's saying it's not real enough. That has in the past helped students to kind of understand. When the young person to whom you are speaking at Maverick, in the myth of Maverick, is asked by you to take out the $5,000 out of his or her pocket, and to hold it out in front to identify the observation that it's not real. You are making a philosophic observation about that money. Plato is not saying that that money can't allow you to go out and buy $5,000 of stuff. Okay? He's not saying that it doesn't exist. He's saying that about that money, it is in some ways philosophically not as valuable, not as real as what? Well, in a word, freedom. Think of it this way. Plato will ask this question. What if right now we were to go into the streets of Orland and just walk up randomly to people and say, congratulations, you have just won a $10 million award that is about to be given to you. Most people by that way will probably look somewhat skeptical and dubious at you if you had some way to prove to them this was in fact really the case, because it's not like you walk around with 10 mil in a bag, right? And you were to say to the individual, $10 million is about to become yours. You've won some sweepstakes or whatever, and there's this grant or whatever that's about to be. The question isn't, however, the question of the money. This is the question Plato likes to ask. Do you believe that your life will be better once you have $10 million than your life now? Now, Plato's interested in the way a person responds, because the assumption vis-a-vis Glaucon is that most people will say, yeah, of course my life would be better if you want to give me 10 mil. Plato's question, though, is interesting in this regards. He asks, better why? What would make $10 million added to your life make your life better? And of course, the answer is a simple one. You would probably say, dude, if I had $10 million, I would never have to, see how that works? Right? That's our first thought. I would never have to work again. Plato will then ask a really intriguing question. What does that mean? Well, you know, that means I wouldn't have to work. To which Plato's now going to follow up and say, well, what will you do? Isn't all of life work? Because it seems to me we can watch people's lives who have $10 million and never have to work as they lie next to pools for protracted periods of time. And then, of course, that gets boring. We're familiar with the way Fitzgerald dealt with this topic in Great Gatsby. These people have the $10 million. What is the quality of the life that they live? For those of you that read Great Gatsby and said, the one thing I can say about the novel is that it's boring, hurrah, you got it. That's what Fitzgerald wanted you to know. That's right. Life of $10 million is boring. It's chained in a cave. Now some of us will say, please, please, please give me the opportunity of that boring existence where I needn't worry. There's a key phrase. I needn't worry about my future and my economics. That word worry, that anxiety, that dread of the unknown will now be for Plato an important observation. Why? Because when that maverick woman walks into the store and she gives you that nasty look before she drops her money, she gives you that get a real job look, think about why she feels she has the right to give you that look. She has the $10 million. She believes it gives her power over you. She can tell you what to do. Because she has money, she has power. The Athenian state was no different. Individuals with currency, we think of course of Cephalus at the beginning of our dialogue. Individuals with currency have power over other people. Plato will say power over others is a myth. It isn't real. It appears to be real. Your thoughts are, if I only had $10 million, I'd never have to work and no one would ever have to tell me what to do. I would tell other people what to do. But Plato will point out that the only real freedom. See, think about what really is being said. If I had $10 million, my life would be better. Another way to say that is if I had $10 million, my life would be freer. I would be free. Free from the economic constraints that make me worry. Where am I going to go to school? How am I going to pay for it? What am I going to be when I grow up? All of those fears would then go away if I had $10 million. I would be free. Plato will make an interesting observation, though, in Republic 7, and then pick it up in Republic 9. Freedom is ever only about self. You never have power over others. That's what Thrasymachus doesn't understand. Just because someone's pointing a gun at you does not necessarily mean you're going to do what it is they say. In the same way that money falling on the floor does not of its very nature mean you will want it and pick it up and take it. This is a choice that you make. Freedom is always a choice contingent on how you discipline yourself. This is fundamental to the Platonist view of philosophy. This idea is foundational to understanding Marcus Aurelius, who by 200 Common Era will be reading a text written almost 700 years prior, and Marcus Aurelius will gain this insight. The only real freedom is the freedom you give to yourself. You don't have power over others. Parents really don't have power over children. It's right about now that we begin to understand that truth. The only power parents really have over children is when children give respect to the parent. Agreed? The young daughter leaving without her top on in an earlier conversation can get in the car and take the top off again. There is absolutely nothing that the parent can do to keep that from happening. Are you familiar with the text Romeo and Juliet? Parents have no power. It is a mythic kind of power. The only power parents ever have is when children willingly give to parents a part of their freedom that is earned through respect, sometimes through fear, no doubt. We'll get to that notion of fear versus love when we hit Machiavelli, right? But Plato will point out that true freedom comes in the moment when one understands one's own choices are only the ones that you have really control over. Everything else is kind of an illusion. Let's point out $10 million might be said to make one more happy. That's now ready for us to move to Republic 9. Happy. Now, in some ways, we've already been talking about this notion of happiness. Let's return to our junior observations when we pointed out that one of the greatest of the Enlightenment intellects, Thomas Jefferson, would follow the greatest philosopher of the Enlightenment, John Locke, and would point out 2 times in that classic document, the American Declaration of Independence, that happiness is a word used twice. Remember? 2 different times. The notion of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is a very ancient word, the notion of happiness. And what does it mean? I asked a group of juniors last week, how do you know when you're happy? Define it. And then Plato loves to do this, watch students just squirm. No, I need a definition of the word. What does it even mean? And how will you know when you're happy? Let's be fair. Often, the notion of happiness is a notion that you don't recognize in the moment. It's only qualified afterwards. When you look back and say, oh, that was a moment of tremendous elation when something great happened, for example, maybe a success of some kind or another, maybe a performance that for you was spot on. And in the moment, you were only doing whatever it was you were doing. You weren't doing it saying, I am happy, I am happy. You only qualify the moment after the fact. The question will now be raised in Republic 9. To what degree am I happy if I am a philosopher? Now let's point out that really underlying this view is what we will call the development of morals. So let's pause for a moment here and take a bit of a hiatus and a little vacation away from Republic 9 to make an observation about moral development. It is not unusual in university classes, in ethics classes, psych classes, and sociology classes, to talk about what we call moral development. The ways in which individuals evolve or develop, mature, to begin to have different understandings of morals. What is right, what is wrong. Typically speaking, this kind of moral development will begin with a very egocentric kind of view. A child will be happy when that child has what that child wants, right? It is a child's view of the world that says, everything is for me and about me. I really don't care about you. I don't care about anybody else. I want what I want. Two children divvying up M&Ms, and the one little girl says, one for you, one for me. One for you, one for me. One for me, one for me, one for you. And she has absolutely no problem with that. She assumes, I guess, that the other person doing the divvying would do something quite similar, right? That is to say, egocentric. My morals are my morals. Don't tell me what to do. Of course, Thrasymachus would understand this view very well, right? That is to say, don't try and tell me what's right and wrong. I know what's right and wrong by virtue of what I want. Of course, Plato will point out in Republic 1 that it's altogether possible that what you want changes. Right? Depending upon where you are in your status of life, etc. From the egocentric model, we now move to the second stage. It doesn't take long for young children to be taught, yeah, that's not the way the world works. There's more than just you living in the universe. And to that degree, an ethnocentric model is the next stage. That is to say, some family, some tribe, some nation will begin to make some kind of rules that are moral in nature. No, you don't get to behave this way. You have to behave another way. And to that degree, you are acting in moral ways if you behave according to the laws of the tribe, the group, the church, whatever it is that is the controlling element for you. The ethnocentric model, however, becomes problematic, as Plato points out. Because, of course, each tribe has its own ideas of some kind of moral ethic, and inevitably war or contest of some kind, conflict, will begin. Which allows us to think about a third stage in moral development, what we will call world-centric. This begins to see not just the individual group as being significant, but other groups as well as having equal merit. Think of what happens in the Enlightenment, when for so long, slaves are considered somehow lesser beings. And then this world-centric view begins to say, yeah, maybe our religious model that says we have a right to treat slaves this way is flawed in some way. We should maybe begin to think in more world-centric ways about morals and moral developments. By the way, I should point out that there is a final stage that many philosophers now are calling an integral model. This is simply a postulating that all of these stages are of value in their developmental sequence. It is only natural that as we move from each stage to the next, we have a tendency to look back on the earlier stage as lesser than. often complaining that even individuals have to go through that stage. Why do 7th graders have to be 7th graders? They're pretty egocentric in many ways in their thinking. By senior year, we begin to have a bit more of a world-centric view. We begin to understand that everyone is deserving of a bit more maybe respect than I've accorded to them in the past. Well, let's talk now about Republic 9 and Plato's view on happiness. We're going to have a bit of fun and games here, if you will, no pun intended, as Plato starts to play the game with happiness. Plato will say that there's basically 3 kinds of happiness. This will not shock Ms. Eves, who's pointed out already that Plato loves his 3s. There is the pleasure, if you're writing this, by the way, in your notes, I would form a pyramid. In the same way that in Republic 3 we formed a pyramid. In Republic 4, of the 4 cardinal virtues, we formed a pyramid, placing, as we pointed out in Republic 4, wisdom superior, for example, to temperance in some ways. I would recommend a pyramid here as well, and at the apex of the pyramid I would put what for Plato is the penultimate of pleasures, the pleasures of knowledge, wisdom we might say. Beneath it, there is the pleasures of success, right? Recognition and the like, fame. And then finally, the pleasures of gain and satisfaction. Notice that these, to some degree, correspond to the Platonist view of the 3 classes of society and to the cardinal virtues themselves of wisdom, courage, temperance, self-control. Now, Plato makes an interesting observation. He says the following: the philosopher is the only one that knows all 3. This is an interesting argument. The way I like to teach this, though, Mr. Wilson, is the following. If you were to go to a 6th grader who is struggling with her mathematics homework, this is the most difficult, painful, challenging work, and you were to say to her, maybe not without a bit of an ironic smile, you know, it is hard, but let me tell you something about mathematics and 6th grade mathematics. There is this stuff coming in roughly 5 more years called calculus, which will make your 6th grade mathematics look like playing with Plato. She will say about that 2 things. 1, you don't know what you're talking about. There isn't any mathematics more difficult than the mathematics I'm now doing. And in some ways, she, of course, has to be right, because she doesn't know anything about calculus yet. Right? To that degree, only you can really express to her the difference between the quality of difficulty of the mathematics that she is now engaged in. Plato will say the same thing about happiness. He is not denying there is joy from picking up $5,000. He's not denying that. He is saying that is a form of happiness. You could in fact ask people, why would you take the money? And ultimately they would say, because it will make me happy to spend the money. We all understand that. That makes total sense to us. Plato doesn't deny that happiness. That is a form of happiness. Question, but what if you're caught? That could be bad for my rep. My reputation might look bad. Look and see what you wrote. The happiness of success. That's a different kind of happiness. I would like the $5,000, but I guess I'm probably more interested in having a good reputation and the opportunity of future employment, right? I would prefer to have other jobs coming than just $5,000, right? So I'm not going to take the $5,000, not because I don't want the $5,000, not because it won't make me happy, but because reputation makes me a little bit more happy than just having $5,000. Let's face it, $5,000 goes away pretty quickly. My reputation is probably a little bit more important than $5,000. But there is a third form of happiness that only the philosopher, Plato says, can enjoy. And that is the realization that the greatest happiness is in being aware that you don't need the money, and in the end, you don't even need the rep. Because here's the deal. You could pretend like you're giving the money back because you really want to, and thereby have a good reputation. We're all familiar with people who have really good reputations in public, but we know about them in private. Right? How How often have you said, for example, to your parents about some student at Worland High School, when your parent was holding that student up as a worthy model, why don't you be more like X? And you say, Ma, really? You don't know X. She just seems very... Right. The key word there is the word seems. If only you knew what I knew. See how that works? See, that we're all familiar with that. In fact, remember, that's the argument Glaucon makes, is that we're all teaching our children to appear to be honest, because everybody wants us to be honest, when the truth of the matter is, not everybody is honest. In fact, nobody's honest. We'll all take the money if we have the chance to do it. And remember, the myth of the maverick, not get caught. Remember that one? No punishment involved, no potential reward involved. This third highest form of happiness, the calculus, as opposed to the 6th grade math. The calculus of true happiness for Plato can only be experienced by individuals who have transcended the other two. Which is why, he will say to Glaucon, individuals who are stuck with the first kind of happiness or the second kind of happiness will not get it. In the same way that a 6th grader will say, there is no such thing as harder math than 6th grade math. What, are you kidding me? Of course, think about this. This stage model works really well. Couldn't you at least plant the seed of doubt in the 6th grade by saying, but in 4th grade, math was kind of hard then too. You didn't know about 6th grade math in 4th grade. You thought in 4th grade that was the hardest math. Now you know 6th grade math is harder than 4th grade math, right? If there's such a thing as 4th grade math that becomes 6th grade math, is it possible there's 8th grade math if you're a 6th grader? See, now you've planted this potentiality. Let's say it this way. Plato's Republic will look at a student who backs up away from a red brick wall. I actually had to give a presentation once to a group of prisoners in a room that was completely brick. And I made the observation right away. I said, I think we need a word picture to start with. Let me explain to you what I think most of us have lived our lives at for the last X number of years. Imagine for a moment, I said I won't do this, but imagine for a moment that I were to just turn and give that wall right there a really dirty look. And I were to turn and run at it and hit it just as hard as I could. Hard, just run right into it. And I fall down. And my nose is starting now to bleed a bit from where I ran into that wall so hard. And I start yelling at the wall. I back up even further. And I run at it again. Wham! Only now I'm getting up. My arm is broken. My nose is completely to the side of my face, part of the skin of my face, because this is a nasty red brick wall I just ran into. And now I start cursing at the wall, shouting the F word over and over again. And I start backing up even further to run at the wall one more time. When someone steps up to me and says, excuse me, just a few steps to the right is a thing called a door. You open it, and you go out. You don't have to keep running into the wall over and over and over again. This is what Plato does in Republic. He says, really? You think 5 bones on the floor is real? Not real enough. But if you want to keep running into the wall, that's fine. I believe in freedom. But might I suggest to you an invention called a door? You open it. You walk out. That is a reworking, if you will, isn't it, of Republic 7 and the notion of education. To be shown the door. Of course, let's be fair, you still must choose to walk through the door. Knowing it's there does not emancipate you yet. Another way to say this is the map is not the territory. Knowing about the outside of the cave is not the same thing as being in the outside of the cave. Although we often confuse the two. Plato will play a continued game here. He'll actually do some calculus, mathematics. It's kind of funny. Remember, he's a math guy. He will actually go so far as to say that after proper calculation, the truly happy individual is 729 times happier than all other men or women. Let's point out that there could be some irony here, and it's probably fairly clear that there is. Plato playing a bit of a game here, maybe with us to say, the only real joy will be understood when you're there. In the moment of your greatest happiness, you're unaware of happy. You're simply experiencing. The unjust individual, right, has to some degree starved, it's an interesting word picture, starved that part of himself or herself that's truly human. This is what evil then is. This is the theodicic enterprise as answered by Plato. Evil is a lack of freedom, a running into the wall over and over again and being mad at the wall for being there. Republic is now complete at Republic 9. The question obviously is, does it work? Does it make sense? Are these arguments for you viable? Let's point out, most of the arguments of Republic don't work if you are still sitting chained in a cave. If you are at the bottom of that little pyramid you just wrote on your paper, if you are incapable of consideration of higher forms of happiness, most of these arguments will not be heeded by you. No, I don't want a door. I want to run into the wall some more. Okay. At some point, your body's going to stop working so well. Okay. Now to Republic 10. Often considered to some degree an appendix, often considered as almost a joke. Our lecturer, Mike Segru, has often said, in fact, that most of Republic must be read as humor, as joke, as irony. Socrates, of course, always playing the game of irony. There's two main parts of Republic 10 that I'll point out to you. The first is what we will call the attack on the arts. We're going to have some interesting arguments made how artists are very dangerous folk. Note the irony of this. The artists are the ones thrown out of Plato's ideal state. So if Plato was living in the ideal state, he would have been the first one thrown out. Right? As an artist. See? Okay. So you have to begin to read some of this as a bit ironic. And yet, we do have a fairly legitimate question. To what degree does art transport the human spirit? In some ways, control the human spirit. Find really good rhythms, for example, in a song, and you cannot help but want to move. Physically move. The power of rhythm, the power of melody, the power of a well-drawn image, etc., etc. Remember that Aristotle's Poetics will in many ways be a response to Republic 10. Remember, Aristotle will have studied under Plato for some 30 years, right? Aristotle will know Republic and its ideas very well as he writes Poetics. The second part is going to be the question of afterlife, the doctrine of the immortality of the soul afterlife. The idea here is the question, what happens after one goes? And you have this, what's called the myth of, what? The myth of Ur. Yeah, you have this guy who has this near-death experience, this life after life experience. And he comes back to kind of tell about what it's like. And he says, well, it's really strange in the afterlife. You're going to come back as something. You reincarnate. Remember, the Greeks believe in this transmigratory idea. But you get to choose what you come back as. And it's kind of interesting. You can come back as something really amazing and stellar, you know, an animal. Or you can come back as something lesser than, you see. Okay. The idea here is going to be playing a bit of a game about the question of, if you could choose before you came into this world to live a life, would it have been this life? No, I want to choose to grow up in my 18th year, my 17th year, my 18th year, to sit in room 303 and listen to Plato lectures in Worland, Wyoming. Would this have been what you had chosen? Or would you have chosen a different life? And what kind of life and why? For example, if after you die, let's say, for example, you die this evening, and you can retain all of the memories of the first 18 years, everything. You remember totally everything. And then someone says to you, now you get to go back and do it all over again, choose. Do you want to come back and do this exact same kind of life? Or is there another life that you've seen or been exposed to that you would prefer to kind of come back and live? And on what grounds would you make a decision like that? I want to come back and be very wealthy. I want to come back and have lots and lots of, see your little pyramid you wrote? I want to come back and have lots of the stuff at the bottom. Or I want to come back and be very famous. That's the second. Or I want to come back and finally figure it out. Be wise. I'm reminded of that short story where the individual who loved to talk was bet by his pal, if you sit and say absolutely nothing for an entire year, I'll pay you $1 million. To which the guy said, only if I get to read. And he said, okay. So a room was constructed. For a year, he never said a word to anyone. Food was brought for him. He lived in complete life of silence. And all he did was read. On the day of 1 year, the guy who had made the bet, he had gone broke. He had lost all his money and was deeply concerned now that he had to step up and say, oh, the $1 million I promised to you I don't have. On his way there, he was sweating bullets. When he showed up, the guy said, hey, by the way, I can now talk to you, so I'll tell you, that $1 million bet, I don't want your money. And the guy was like, you don't want it? That's ironic, because I don't have it. He was like, why don't you want it? He said, well, I spent a year reading, and now I realize I don't want it. It would only make me unhappy. I would prefer the ideas than the money. See, this notion is a very Platonist idea. It reminds us, of course, now and final, it reminds us of the idea from Nietzsche, the great German philosopher, who will posit what we will call, what he calls, eternal reoccurrence. It works something like this. About any life, and by the way, he is not postulating that this would really happen, but imagine for a moment that at the moment of your death, you immediately have to go back and relive the life you have just lived in every way all over again. Exactly the same way. You would live it all over again. And then the moment you die, again, come back to immediately relive again that same life all over again. And the moment you die, come back and again relive the exact same life all over again. For those of you who, of course, know Bill Murray's Groundhog Day, you're familiar with how he's playing with Nietzsche's ideas here of eternal recurrence. About that model, Nietzsche asked this question. Are you living a life to this point, as of this hour, about which you would say, I would willingly come back and relive it again and again and again, every choice exactly the same way? And if you say out loud, that would for me be Dante's hell, to come back and relive the same life I've lived already and make all those same choices. Nietzsche asks a really intriguing question. What does that say about the choices of the life you've lived? And what does it suggest about the rest of today? What if you were to live every moment of your life assuming you had to do it over and over and over again? By the way, for Nietzsche, this is a great tie-in to moral theory. About any questionable moral act, ask, would I be willing to do it again and again and again? And if the answer to that is no, or in Dante's language, hail no. About that act, you would probably say, no, I'm not going to do that. That's an immoral act. Nietzsche says, you can live your life in such a way that it becomes a work of art when you accept or embrace the freedom that is your life. Namely, you get to determine what the next hour of your life will look like. And the hour after that. And the hour after that. Of course, as Thoreau pointed out for us last year, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Let's remember, Thoreau took Republic with him to the woods at Walden. He was heavily influenced by Republic and the ideas of Republic. Why? Because he was aware that the legacy is an intriguing one. There's two important thinkers that I'll point out finally in the notes. One will be the great Christian thinker, St. Augustine. St. Augustine will read Republic and be so impressed by it that he will inject into Christian theology the Platonism that most of you, if you were raised Christian, were actually raised with without realizing it. The second thinker that I want to point out, so influenced by Plato, will be Marcus Aurelius, that greatest of Stoic philosophers, who will take Republic, reinvent the ideas of Platonism in some ways, kind of make it more fashionable, and it will become his life's philosophy. We'll talk about him next week. Thank you. I hope that you've enjoyed to some degree some of the ideas, and I hope you enjoy running into walls or going through doors, whichever is your choice.